Okay, so Be'ezras Hashem, we are continuing with our shirim of the Zohar on the Parsha, and we're entering into a new book. We're entering into a new stage of Shemos, of the descent down into exile, away from the Sefer HaYashar, away from the place where Ha'adam Nivra Yashar, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted to create the human being Yashar. In spite of all of the deviation and the ups and the downs of Sefer Bereshis, nevertheless, it was still a clear starting point and a clear destination. It was meant to start with Gan Eden and arrive at the desire for redemption. At that point, we enter into the book of Shemos. Shemos is a descent away from Yashrus. Shemos is a descent away from clarity, a descent away from a direct perception of mission orientation, where the tachlis is abundantly clear, and it's where a person descends down into a place that appears to be pointless, that appears to be levatala, that appears to be without essentiality, which is the secret of the pigam, of the issue at the heart of the foundation of all things, at the heart of Yesod, which this week's Parshios are working to help bring us through, is how to grapple with the loss of the essence, with the loss of a sense of essentiality, of Yashrus, of a direct understanding of what it is that I need to be doing and where it is that I need to be doing it, and how to descend down into the depths of the loss of language that is found specifically in Mitzrayim, with the loss of self that is found specifically in Mitzrayim. Now, it's Be'ezras Hashem, the role of the Jewish people to descend down into Mitzrayim, to descend down into the exile of speech, to that place where speech is no longer accessible to an individual. Speech, the ability to reflect, to define, to orient oneself in this world in a clear and defined nature, is to have our own particular language. Each person has their own os, each person has their own language, each person has the language that they're coming to reveal the Torah through. Just as Moshe Rabbeinu translated the Torah into 70 languages, each and every one of us is an aspect of Moshe, and each and every one of us is an aspect of one of those translations, because our job is ultimately to be a meturgaman, to be a translator of the Torah of HaKadosh Baruch Hu as it's mislabish in the Das of Moshe, to find our own nakuda, to find our own Torah Shabbal Peh, our ability to refine from the loss of clarified narrative, to build again a story, a narrative in accordance with our understanding. Meaning to say, Bereshis is the assertion of a direct point of meaning. There is a clear mission orientation when it comes to Bereshis. Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, archetypal models in which a person has to follow and what can take us away from that path, and the need to keep a singular connection to that path, and the secret of Maisa Avosim and Labanim. The descent from Bereshis into Shemos is the descent away from meaningfulness and a clear tachlis that informs every moment of my experience, and it's a descent into the fear or the sentiment of batala, of something that is wasteful. Yosef, which represents hyperessentiality, the fact that everything has a singular point at the heart of it that I need to connect to in order to make this meaningful, that secret of the ikr, which the Zohar HaKadosh, or the Tkune Zohar HaKadosh refers to as the Rikiya bin Mayim L'mayim, and Zak the Hakdama to the Tkune Zohar, Tishkach Rikiya v'timsa ikr, that you take the osios of Rikiya and you find ikr, because the Nakuda of Yosef, the Nakuda of his chabrus and his kashrus, and the shmira of that bris miyuchad bein zel lezeh, with this point to that point, is the gift of essentiality, the belief that there is a yashrus here, there is a specific point that I am moving towards. The descent down into Mitzrayim is a loss of that point. It's a swallowing up of that point, and there's a pointlessness at the heart of it. That was the gullus that Paro enslaved the Jewish people with, building for the sake of absolutely nothing, pure pointlessness, pure bittul, pure levatala, this negation of value. And that is the descent from Bereshis into Shemos, finding ourselves in that speechless place where we no longer have access to our private language, where we no longer have access to our specific line of language that we use to describe our experience to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We find ourselves now stuck in a place of Galus Hadibor, stuck in a place where words fail at this point. Now, it's specifically in this place, in the descent down into Mitzrayim, where we lose our singular, forceful way of expressing ourselves through the yashrus of language, and we descend down into the Gullus Hadibor, where the self can no longer express itself. On the one hand, it's a descent down into meaninglessness, into a nature of meandering, into wandering without purpose, which is the death of the Yesod. Ultimately, it's specifically within Mitzrayim, within that place of Mitzrayim, that the Jewish people are going to be able to once again clarify the essence, clarify the Yesod, to be mavarer everything that needs to be nisbarer, to elevate everything that needs to be elevated, to empty it out, to find all of the nakuda of essentiality in that place, in that meaningless place, in that place of exile and meaninglessness and the meandering of the law loss of value and the loss of meaning, v'chule, in order to identify, search it out, and recover it and reveal it specifically within Mitzrayim, to reveal meaning at the heart of meaninglessness, to reveal language at the heart of speechlessness, to reveal the ability of the individual to lose the sight of that absolute yashrus and that clarity of mission, but nevertheless, in the fall away from the clarity of mission, in the stuttering of no longer being able to convey what it is that I thought I needed to convey, I forgot the shluah, I forgot the promise that I made before coming down into this world. I fell into forgetfulness, which is the death of speech, because I no longer remember the source from which I come. It's specifically in Mitzrayim that we have the ability to be mavarer umelavein, to find and clarify from within the bilbul of language, from within the concealment of speech, our own personal narrative and our own translation. This is one of the reasons that Shnayim Mikra ve'Echad Targum, as the Meforshim point out, is Rosh Tevos Shemos, because ultimately the tachlis of Shnayim Mikra ve'Echad Targum, of saying the Torah over in its original language and then translating it as well, or saying it twice in its original language and translating it as well. We're not going to go into the depths of translation now. We've spoken about in Shirim on Rabbi Nachman and Torah Yotes, but ultimately, the secret of translation is the ability to undergo the loss of original meaning and essential meaning within the original language of the experience of Sefer Bereshis, to undergo the death of speech and the silencing of speech and the suffocation of breath, and to undergo the loss of meaning, and then to still uncover the residual light of meaning that existed there, which is the job of the translator, to uncover the essential kernel of the original language that rests buried and folded into the lost nature of the narrative, and from there to rebuild the narrative. Again, translation is not copying. Copying is an attempt at replication, which is ultimately perhaps an impossibility. But ultimately, the act of translation is always a failed act in terms of trying to replicate the original, because it is the secret of recreating the original through the lens of my own personal experience that can only come about by way of losing hope or absolute grasp of the original. And that's the secret of the descent into Mitzrayim, the loss of original language and the descent into the need for translation, but also the secret of translation, which is re-included back into the Torah, not only to reveal that translation is also part of the Torah, but to reveal that translation to a certain degree, as the Maharal and Rabbi Nachman point out, is of a higher level than the original language. The original language of Sefer Bereshis, Sefer Yashar, is the osios of what HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives us. The secret of Shemos, of the birth or the beginning of exile, which is the beginning of Torah Sheba'al Peh to a certain degree, as we're going to see, is ultimately the secret of us speaking back to the Rabbanu Shalom, of us developing our own language. And that's why Bilevenim, that the Mitzrim punished the Jewish people with all sorts of hard work. So the Zohar points out that what is Levanim? Da libun halacha. This is lumdus. This is learning niglos haTorah. This is searching out the halachic kernel that rests at the heart of the Yam HaTalmud and the bilbul of the Talmud Bavli, and ultimately to break through with the Levanim and the Chomer, da kal v'chomer. These are the workings of the mind and the penetration of the daf and into the sugya itself, with the 13 tools of the mind, which displace original ideas in order to recreate them, which we refer to as the Yud Gimel Midos Shator and Adreshes Bahen, and it's specifically in Mitzrayim that we find and uncover the value of translation, which is why Talmud Bavli is written in Aramaic, and it's also why the Zohar Kodesh is written in Aramaic, because as Rav Tzadok points out, and as we've spoken about in the past, the nature of Aramaic is a secret of revealing the light from within concealment itself. It's retrieving a lost language, specifically where we thought language died, and revealing that not only did language survive, but we've doubled our language. We now come back with a Shnayim Mikra ve'Echad Targum, and that's the secret of Shemos, Shnayim Mikra ve'Echad Targum. Now, the Zohar Kadosh is utilizing such a beautiful pasuk, such a beautiful space, in order to illuminate the mindset as we descend down into Mitzrayim, as we descend down into Sefer Shemos, into that loss of the original language. And Avada, the Zohar Kadosh, starts off with psukim from Shir Hashirim, because Shir Hashirim is the heart of the descent into the exile. It's why by tzafon, by the concealment, when the mind has to deal with the fact that in order to taste Cherus and Geula, a person has to sometimes go into Mitzrayim, it's specifically there that we sing Shir Hashirim. It's specifically at the heart of Shir Hashirim, at the Ahava Mesuteres that is boyer in every element of distance. In Torah Shebichsav, it seems that sometimes there is an up and a down and a loss of love and a retrieval of love and a loss of love and a retrieval of love through the context of Shir Hashirim, through the Kodesh HaKadoshim, which is inaccessible in any actual grasp of a way. The language of Shir Hashirim reorients us to the fact that there's an Ava Mesuteres at the heart of everything, and even the distance, and even the gaps, and even the descents, and the circuitous routes that love takes and connectivity takes. Ultimately, there's a secret of Ahava, Boyer, Lamala, Lamala, like Rabbi Nachman describes the Aish that is Boyer in the heart of a Jewish individual to the Or Ein Sof. So the Zohar Kadosh is going to start off with a pasuk in Shir Hashirim in Parak Dalid, pasuk Ches. Isi milvanon kala, isi milvanon tavare teshure meresh amana meresh shanir v'chermon mima'onos aryes mahare nemarim. A profoundly beautiful and poetic pasuk describing times of redemption through geographic locations, through an orientation towards a landscape, towards a way of being in the world, through location, through the powerful imagery of Eretz Yisrael, which also represents stages in the temporal process of Klal Yisrael, because time and space are always interconnected. And ultimately, what we're going to look at over here is the first two words, Isi milvanon. Where is this coming from? Where is this Levanon? And what's coming from this Levanon? And Rashi, in the beauty of his Perush, describes two options. That on the one hand, Levanon is the Beis Hamikdash. It's the place where we were mechuber to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Lev and the Nun, the 32 pathways of Chachma and the 50 Sha'arim of Bina together. Levanon, the Lev and the Nun together, the Yichud of Chachma and Bina, the Beis Hamikdash, the Or of Keser, the Or of Malchus in its Shirish. And we get exiled from there. We fall away from Sefer HaYashar. We fall away from the Avos Ha'olam. We fall away from the pillars of Avodah, from Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, which represents the Beis Hamikdash. And we find ourselves being cast into exile. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu is telling us over here that I'm going to go with you. When you leave Levanon, I'm going to place myself into exile. That God is telling us that He's going to be with us in times of descent as well. And then when I return back, it means when I return back to the Beis HaMikdash after exile, that I was with you in exile and I'm going to be with you when I return. And then it's the secret of Tavura Merosh Amana, which is Rosh Tevos Emes, that comes about through the jumbling of MS itself, because it's only through a backwards appreciation of reality, learning the MS after the experience is already over, not seeing the MS necessarily in the beginning where it would be Aleph Mem Taf, which is the ability to see things as they are from above to below, but rather the orientation of Emuna, which is from the bottom up, which is Tavue Miroisha Mana, which is Aleph Mem Taf, meaning I have to start from Emuna, which is Malchus, and go back upwards, because it's a secret of translation. It's a secret of only beginning to understand the reality of things afterwards, and that reveals retroactively what the reality always was. And with the knowledge that we will eventually retroactively look back on the experiences that we're having now through a lens of clarity, the knowledge of that future retroactivity that we're going to engage in is what gives us the ability to trust that intuition now and to see the retroactive revelation of what will be even prior to the end, to taste the end in the beginning, to taste emuna, which is a secret, which Rabbi Nachman says is the shir pashut kafel meshulish u'meruba, which is the secret of the growth that comes incrementally, specifically by way of the mitzarim, by way of the concealing elements. But suffice it to say that there are three options in Rashi as to what this pasuk is referring to, what Levanon represents. Is it exile from the Beis Hamikdash into exile? Is it a redemption from exile back into the Beis Hamikdash? And ultimately, the Teshurim Meresh Amana, as Rashi points out, is the secret of Emuna, which holds both of them together, the beginning and the end of the beginning. It's the secret of Ani va'ayin, ayin va'ani, the Malchus and the Keser, how are they mechuber b'yachad. So what we're going to see, the Zohar Kadosh brings down three opinions as to what this Levanon is, and we're only going to read the Shita of Rebbe Shimon. Eila Shemos b'nei Yisrael habayim Mitzrayim es Yaakov ishu beiso ba'u. Reb Chia Pasach. Reb Chia opens up his mouth and he says, Isi milavanon kala isi milavanon tishur meresh amana meresh shani v'cherman ma'anus aryes mahari nimras. Hai kral knesses Yisrael itmar b'shaysa denafki Yisrael mi Mitzrayim v'kriv l'tor dahar Sinai. So we see, like the second Shita in Rashi, Reb Chia is saying that this pasuk is talking about redemption. This pasuk is talking about the exit out of Mitzrayim back to Har Sinai. Because why? Because ultimately it's the process of the libun halacha, the difficulty and the lave and the double nature of the lave and the confusion of exile that is going to orient us to the ability to come back to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And Rabbi Yossi Oikim La Lahaikra, and Rabbi Yossi has a different opinion. After the Zohar has an entire arichos on Daf Beis on Daf Gimel Amud Aleph, so Rabbi Yossi Oikim Lahaikra Kach Nach the Shchinte Begalusta de Mitzrayim. No, Rabbi Yossi says, Rabbi Chia, I understand what you're saying. I don't have any argument about what you're saying, except this pasuk represents the exile itself, going into exile, not leaving exile. Just as Rashi points out that this pasuk contains a secret that both elements are fundamentally significant to to the grand perspective of the fullness of redemption, that one must include the energy or the experience of exile within the redemptive process itself, not to see them as two separate expressions, not to separate the Torah of Torah Shebechsav and the struggle of Torah Shebal Peh, not to separate the descent and the ascent, but rather to see them as two pulsational expressions at the heart of a singularity that can't be grasped except by way of what appears to be doubled in the secret of Achas Dibra Elokim Shtaim Zu Shamati, in the secret of HaKadosh Baruch Hu spoke once, but I heard twice, in the secret of Echad Shu Shtayim, that one that is two and two that is one ultimately. But what we're going to focus on is the third shita over here of Rabbi Shimon, which we can say is aligned with the third shita in Rashi, which says that ultimately, whether it's from exile to redemption or from redemption to exile, either way you look at it, this secret of including Targum within the Ksav itself, Shnai Mikra ve'echad Targum, needing the Shlemos and the Chatzi to reveal the Shlemos and Chatzi b'vasachas. So Rabbi Shimon orients us to the essence of what's really being discussed here. What is this Levanon? Where is this Levanon? What are we trying to do over here? So, Zakt Rabbi Shimon. Zakt Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon Amar Haikra al Raza the Yehuda de Mehem Nusa Itma. Rabbi Shimon says it's not about from the top to the bottom or from the bottom to the top, not from redemption to exile or exile to redemption, as Rabbi Chia and Rabbi Yossi says, but rather this pasuk is speaking about the secret of unity, which is rooted in faith. Yechidah de Mehemnusa, the secret of knowledge of what faith actually is, which means that it's a knowing that leads me to the secret of faith, not a faith that leads me to a place of absolute knowledge, but a knowledge that leads me to a place of faith, which is why it's still referred to as Raza. In the Zohar Kadosh, it's still referred to as Raza the Yehuda. One would think that perhaps in the book of the Zohar, where everything is being revealed, it would just say Yehuda, because that's the language we're speaking. Why do we have to speak in the optics of secrecy? Nevertheless, the secret is, as all of the tzaddikim point out, especially the Leshem, is that it's still a secret. Even after it's revealed, it's still a secret. And that's why it's referred to as Raza, which is Gematria Yitzchak, as the Emek HaMelech says, and Yitzchak contains more than he ever reveals within himself. He appears to have nothing, and ultimately it reveals a Meya Sha'arim. That's the secret of the Raz, that it never empties itself out. Ha'olam oyem eida al hasod, that Soid Hashem liyareya, v'brisam lahodia, that the secret of the secret is that it always remains a secret even after it's revealed, because ultimately it can never fully be revealed. So Rabbi Shimon says as follows. Rabbi Shimon says, Amar Haikral Razid Yichud Demeim Nusa Itmar, Isim Kala. So what's taking place here? So Rabbi Shimon is going to go into the depths of the experience of speech. Now, this experience was utilized by the Maggid and his Talmidim, and continues to be utilized by the Talmidei Baal Shem Tov and the Talmidim HaMitim of the Gra and the Ramchal and the Rashash, and anybody who's davening with a siddur, and anybody who begins to say the Aleph Beis, and ultimately every Deshama in Klal Yisrael is built into the very fabric of what it means to be a speaking creature. Nefesh Chaya. Nefesh Chaya is Ruach Mamala. It's the capacity to convey ourselves by way of speech, to reveal ourselves. Higalena. Which is why Bereshis is about the clarity of speech, learning how to speak. In Shemos, we descend down into mechanisms of speech because we've lost our speech. We can't express ourselves anymore. We're caught up in the death of speech. And this is why Rabbi Shimon is giving us the key to the yichud that we have to understand, which is going to be the process of expressing speech. Now, what is speech? Speech is the balance between potential and actualization. Speech never exhausts the potential upon which it rests. Speech is always limited in relationship to the silence that preceded it and exists during it and will survive afterwards. Silence is endless. Silence is infinite in its capacity, because every word that is not said means that every word that can possibly be imagined can be said. The moment of speech is a moment of tzimtzum, the hemotzos saper, corresponding to the hegvuros, which are the gvuros that limit things. The mouth is a limiting element. Speech is a limitation. It's a tzimtzum, because when I say one word, I'm not saying every other word. And yes, every word is built upon every word that's not spoken, but nevertheless, it's an act of tzimtzum. And so the secret of speech is the secret of the transition from potential into actuality, and how to ensure that potential not be exhausted by the desire towards actuality, and how actuality not be swallowed up by the presence of potential. How do I manage? How do I maneuver between the inside and the outside, between the outside and the inside, between the neshama and the guf, between the guf and the neshama, between ideal and real and ideal, and good and bad, and light and darkness? This is referred to as kol and dibor. Kol represents the endlessness of the possibility possibility of speech, the fullness of a lexicon, which theoretically an individual can have an endless amount of speech, to babble, to create their own language, to get stumbled up and caught up in their own translation, which becomes an element of the Torah. That's the kol. The kol represents Zer Anpin Kutshabrichu Soiviv Kal Almin, the unity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is above any concept of limitation. Yes, it's still limited because any concept of unlimited nature is still limited, and so kol is not completely unlimited. There's a silence that is even inside of kol, and there's a kol that can't be heard, and there are gradations and gradations and gradations of kolos. But ultimately, seen writ large, kol represents above, and dibor, which is the pirut, which is the prat, which is the expression of a particular point, is ultimately going to be the tzimtzum, and that's going to be dibor. So the tzaddikim always spoke about the yichud of kol and dibor, the unification between potential and actuality, because b'der klal, when I am in a state of potential, I am not capable of being in a state of actuality, because potential means that it's not being actualized, and when I'm in a state of actualization, it means that I can no longer focus on the potential, because actualization is the killing off of potential in one degree or another. The secret of the yichud, the razid, the yichud, the mehemnusa, is the capacity to hold koyach and poyel b'vasachas. Now, the koyach is not lacking anything due to the fact that it's not actualized, but nevertheless, the actualization of the potential adds something. It is a supplemental value. It is not adding and filling something that was missing, but it's adding more to what was already whole. It's making perfection even more perfect, and it's the secret of the Tesefes Kishut. So we're going to see that Sefer HaYashar is kol. Sefer HaYashar is the kol that penetrates throughout reality of Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, that is born out of the kol HaMeshalich Began, that voice of HaKadosh Baruch Hu that prances and it jumps Kavyachol through the Gan Eden. That's the kol. But the birth of Dibor is specifically the exile of Dibor. Dibor is what we're encountering in Shemos, the ability to be a mefaret, to be a mitzamsim, to go into the core habarzel, to learn what it means to speak. And prior to one learning how to speak, there's a loss of speech, because the transition of the endlessness of speech into the specificity of speech, which we're going to receive when we receive the Aseres HaDibros, the tikkun of Dibor in its ultimate form, which is the Torah HaKadosh, as we're going to see. First, we have to undergo the loss of language in order to relearn language, in order to fast so that we can forget about the previous language that we thought we knew, in order to uncover our new language at this moment, and the secret of the Maturgaman, and the secret of being a Matargim. So we're going to see that in spite of the fact that we may have assumed that the kol is what we want and the dibur is what we want to run away from, because exile is constriction and particularity and redemption is openness and expansivity, nevertheless, as we see from the Rebbe over and over, and as we see from all of the tzaddikim, the tachlis is to go from the kol into the dibor, and to reveal how the dibor is not the death of the kol, but rather there's a kol damamadaka that exceeds the words that are being spoken. That every word that I say, I am beckoning a loving desire towards HaKadosh Baruch Hu that is not yet being expressed. As we discussed in the Zohar, when it says, imri fi v'hegyon libi lefanecha, that every word, imri fi, every dibor has a hegyon libi, which is a secret of a kol that is infinite, yet somehow it contains itself within the finite expression. So this is what Rabbi Shimon is giving us access to, and as we're going to see, this is going to be a fundamental key for the transition into Mitzrayim, experiencing Mitzrayim, and ultimately moving out of Mitzrayim, but not empty-handed, but with the gifts of Mitzrayim itself. So Rabbi Shimon Amar Haikra al Rasid Yichud D'Meim Nusa Asim Levanim Kala Koil Amar Ledibor. Kol, the infinitude of voice prior to expression, says to dibor, says to expression. It says to the actualization that wants to emerge out of it. Asi, come, begin the ha koil asi ledibor medaber le bahade lemehave kachad beloy piru de klau. The voice is reaching out to the words and saying, words, please come, be connected to me, be connected, so that we will never be apart, we will never be separated. This is what voice is perpetually whispering into the heart of language itself, that yes, language is limited, but there's an infinite nature that is trying to be conveyed through language. That's the secret of Dibor. That's the secret of Lashon HaKodesh, that each thing is what it is based on the letters. It's the tzimtzum and the giloy bevasachas. It's the chash and the mal, the secret of silence and speech at once. Koil Amar Ledibor. Koil says to Dibor, come. Begin the ha Koil Asi Ledibor, and it always speaks within Dibor itself, saying that please come for the sake of unification. Begin the Koil Ihu Klal the Dibor Ihu Prat, because the Kol is the general principle prior to differentiation, prior to limitation, and language itself is the particularization, the death of the all for the sake of the revelation of the thing itself. But then the thing is not the negation of the or that is underneath it, because that or, that infinite light, that that klal has to exist within the prat as well. The oid klal itzarich leprat, the prat itzarich leklal. And not only this, but the klal needs the prat, just as the prat needs the klal. I understand why the prat needs the klal. I understand why dibor needs kol. I understand why particularization and actualization depends upon potential, why the finite depends upon the infinite, why the expression within concealment, targum, depends on an original language. But mehecha tesi that the klal is dependent on the prat. Why should the all infinite, all powerful space of the general principle be dependent on the particularization of actuality? What exactly is potential lacking? And on this, the Soid Yesharim says in the Teferes HaChanoichi says something incredible that we may have thought. Let's learn the words inside. Klal it starts leprat, prat it starts the klal needs the prat, and the prat needs the klal. So zot the Heilige Soid Yesharim Teferes HaChanoichi perish sha'af shenir de malchus hu a prat. Even though it appears that malchus, which is the dibor, which is the tzimtzum, which is the constriction, which is the hiddenness, which is the absence, etc., etc., even though it appears that this is the particular, the hapratu nifrad ma'oid, and the particular expression of something is fundamentally separate from the yichud, as we see in the Zohar and Parshas Nayach, as well as we see in the Zohar about the separation of the rivers, which we discussed yesterday. Achan kivan shaklal tzal chaprat. But nevertheless, we say that the klal still depends upon the prat, that the infinite depends upon the finite, that the openness and infinitude of the voice depends upon the particularization of words, that the clarity of Bereshis depends upon the loss of language inherent within the descent into exile, that it's specifically through the separation and the descent into separation that we will come to understand and identify the roots of Achdus, that at the perspective of the root, Ein Shum Pirit Klal, there's no separation whatsoever, even in the Prat, even specifically in the Prat. That's the tachlis of going down into the Prat to reveal that even in Dibor there's no separation. The Klal is still there, and naturally, Mizdagvin Kol V'Dibor, there's a yichud, there's a zivug of Kol and Dibor, of the voice and the word, V'Netkale, and what's revealed ultimately is Shagam HaMalchus Sharasha B'Chachma. That's what we're going to see. They both come from Levanon. So the Zohar continues and it says, Klal dibor ihu prat. Aderech klal itzdarech leprat, v'prat itzdarech leklal. Why? Dahal leis kol below dibor, v'leis dibor below kol. There's no kol, there's no purpose to an openness and infinitude of the voice without the desire to express it through the tzimtzum of dibor, just as there is no capacity of the tzimtzum of dibor to function without the open-endedness of the kol that recognizes that I could be saying anything else at the very same moment. And this is what the pasuk means when it says Asi me kala, that the kala malchus comes from Levanon, the ikri de tarvayu me Levanon, that both the Kol and the Dibor, both Zeranpin and Malchus, where do they come from? They come from Chachma. They come from Chachma Kaduma. They come from that place of Ayin. They come from that place where potential and actuality are expressed in and of themselves, where the Chachma is the thing itself, the Koyach Ma, the power of the mind to create its own narration, the power of the mind to translate itself. As the Torah says, Bereshis bara Elokim b'chuchma bara, the HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that the first word of translation is b'chuchma, because the essence of translation is the uncovering of Chachma that develops even more out of itself as it descends down into Mitzrayim, which is Bina, which is why over here, Levanon is not simply Chachma, which is the Lamed Beis Nesivos Chachma, but rather it's the Lev Nun, it's the Bina within Chachma and the Chachma within Bina, which tells us that in order to understand the benefit of the descent down into exile, I have to realize that both exile, which is the Bina, which is the Dibor, which is the particularization, both the Nun Shari Bina and the Lamed Beis Nesivos Chachma, and the Kol itself, they both come from Chachma. The Klal and the Prat are both Makusher to that place where the Klal and the Prat are fundamentally indistinguishable from one another in the point of unfathomability of that Yichud. Teshurim Eresh Amana, and then we can sing out that new song of Amuna from the heights of Amana. Da Ihu Garon. Where is this coming from? It's the Garon, it's the throat. We're talking about actual movement of our mouths, learning to speak, learning to talk to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Pashat Kimashmos, to speak to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to express the words, to allow the kol to move from its endlessness, to be mitzamsem through my mind what I want to try and say, and then to go through the various processes of speech and the tzimtzum of the five parts of the mouth and the constriction of the sounds to give birth to the utterances, and those utterances to give birth to the precision This is the garon. This is exactly what paro is. That paro is the oirif. Paro is the neck. Paro is the blockage of the garon. It's the blockage of speech. And there's the three elements of the neck, the sarim of paro, and those klipos that stand, which we need to redeem out of Mitzrayim. We're redeeming our garon, and we're redeeming the capacity of speech, of the connection between the inside and the outside. Demetema nafkerucha la'ashmakula, because it's from there, from that place of chachma, that the breath, in order to alleviate and give birth to language, comes from Meraza de Levana in Sasim Veganis, from the secret of the Chachma, which is concealed in its hiddenness, because it's the secret of the Shirish, and the Shirish of all of it. Meray Shanir Vechermon Da Ihu Lishna. This is the tongue, Reisha Emsusa, the beginning and the middle, the Mechakel Ledibor, that splits words up in order so that speech can begin to take place from within the endlessness of Kol Mima'nos Arios. What are these lion chambers? Ilin Inun Shinayim. These are the teeth themselves. Meharein Amarim Ilu Inan Shafyan Shlimud Ishtalim Hudibor. So it's the words that are coming from the throat to the upper palate and the lower palate and the tongue and the front of the mouth and the back of the mouth, in terms of breaking up Dibor and then moving through the teeth and ultimately expressing themselves through the lips themselves, which is going to be the Shlemus of Dibor, which is the secret of Shnai Mikra Be'echatagram, of the connectivity between Kolna Dibor and Gullus and Geula, and the secret of Achdus that's Miskal itself in Pirud, and the secret of Pirud that has a place within Achdus, not because Chas v'Shalom there's actual any Pirud, but because Achdus is so big and so unified that even Pirud itself is nishapich into an expression of Achdus itself, which is the Tachlis of Galus Mitzrayim, in order to come to the place of Birur HaDibor B'Shlemus, which is the secret of the Asar Sedibros Be'ezras Hashem.